Joker is not just a comic book villain, it is a mirror held up to a society that often prefers not to look. And in this story, we follow Arthur Fleck, a man whose life is a slow-motion collapse under the weight of poverty, untreated mental illness, and a city that has forgotten how to care. The makeup and the smile are camouflage for a human being who is falling through every crack. And what makes this film sting is not the clown mask, but the feeling that Gotham's streets look a lot like our own, where people pass each other without seeing, and the loudest sound is a laugh that does not mean joy. Arthur's condition, uncontrollable bouts of laughter, reads like a cruel cosmic joke, but it is also a clinical reality that turns every public moment into a risk, every commute into a stage where he never knows what role he will be forced to play. And the truth criminology reminds us of is simple and brutal. Isolation, trauma, poverty, and humiliation do not excuse violence, but they often precede it. When his access to medication is cut, when therapy sessions vanish because budgets vanish, when the last thin thread to normal life is severed by a system designed to save money more than to save people. The descent that follows is not surprising so much as it is inevitable, and this is the most uncomfortable idea the movie offers. Monsters are not born in caves. They are made in crowded rooms by the indifference of the crowd. Watch how the city treats him. The subway scene is not just an outburst. It is a breaking point built from 1,000 small cuts, from the smirks, the shoves, the giggles. The way a man's pain becomes a joke in the eyes of strangers who think they will never be the punchline. The talk show fantasy, Murray's stage with bright lights and a fake warmth, pulls Arthur like a moth. Because for someone invisible, there is nothing stronger than the promise of being seen. And when he finally is, it is not compassion that greets him, but spectacle. A reminder that fame without dignity is just humiliation with better lighting. If you step back, the pattern is clear. The film is not endorsing his choices, it is indicting our choices, asking whether a culture that feeds on humiliation, that monetizes outrage, that confuses attention with affection, might be engineering its own villains, and the debate that erupted around the movie. Does it glamorize violence? Does it radicalize the lonely? Misses a crucial distinction between understanding and endorsing. Between. Explanation and excuse. Comprehension is not celebration. Empathy is not approval. And when art shows us the path that leads to a terrible act, the goal is not to hand out maps, but to warn us where those roads begin. Arthur's transformation is filmed with aching precision. The weight loss that turns his body into bones and angles, the choreography of his dancing that looks like freedom but moves like a seizure, the way Hildegard's cello crawls under your skin so you can feel the gravity pulling him downward as if the city itself were a black hole. Look at the set design, the nicotine yellow apartments, the grim stairwells, the trains that shriek like alarms. And notice how Gotham is not a backdrop but a character, one that refuses to provide a soft place to land. And in that inhospitable world, the clown paint becomes armor, the persona becomes permission, and the mask says what Arthur never can. If I am nothing to you, then I can be anything I choose. But the tragedy is that anything becomes the worst thing, because chaos offers power without responsibility, and a man who has been powerless too long will trade almost anything for the feeling of control, even if it costs him what remains of his humanity. Real-world criminology talks about anomie, the breakdown of social norms, the moment when the rules no longer seem to apply. And you can see it in every frame: the buses that never come, the counselors who never call back, the headlines that never tell stories about men like Arthur until they explode, and then those stories become content for a day, and empathy for an hour, and policy for a minute. That is the machine Gotham runs on, and too often, so do we. Yes, the movie unsettled people, and it should, because it is not about a mastermind with a plan. It is about a man with a wound, and the wound is named neglect. The protests that flare up in the third act are not really about Arthur at all. They are about a city that finally hears its own scream, and the clown mask, spreading through the crowd, is cinematic shorthand for a contagious idea. If respect is not offered, fear will do. But fear is a poor substitute for dignity, and in the long run it always comes back to bite its maker. Here is the hardest question the film poses. If someone like Arthur had been met with care at just one critical juncture, with functioning clinic, a decent job, a neighbor who knew his name, would the climax we watch with wide eyes have evaporated into a life that no one would film? Art cannot rewrite outcomes, but it can rewind our attention to the point where outcomes begin, and that is the power of Joker when read through the lens of real-life psychology. It is not a celebration of revolt, but a case study in collapse. And collapse is never only personal. It is ecological, social, bureaucratic, the kind that happens slowly and then all at once. That is why the laugh feels wrong, even when we recognize ourselves in it. Because the sound we hear is the soundtrack of a man losing his grip while a city loses interest. So what are we supposed to take from this? Pity for the villain, blame for the system, fear of the next Arthur, maybe all three, but most of all, vigilance. The knowledge that the distance between the person we step around on the sidewalk and the person on the news is a chain of small avoidable failures. Joker, in this reading, is a warning label printed in grease paint, and if we are offended, it may be because the warning feels personal. The movie stares at us and asks whether we prefer easy narratives where evil is other people, or harder ones where evil is what grows when people are left in the dark. You can argue with the execution. You can question the ethics of depicting a slow birth of violence in such hypnotic images, but you cannot deny the mirror, and that is the discomfort that keeps the movie alive long after the credits. We want to look away from Arthur, but we cannot. Because on some days, in some lights, in some silences on public transit, we have been him, or near him, or next to him, and we do not know what we might have prevented or provoked. So, the face paint goes on. The cameras roll, the city cheers or jeers, and what begins as an act becomes an identity. And what begins as an identity becomes an ideology, and what begins as an ideology becomes a crowd. And when a crowd wears the same smile, it can do anything as long as it does not have to take it off at the end of the night. The final image lingers because it is not a victory pose. It is a diagnosis. This is what happens when the weakest among us are handed a mask instead of a hand. Films are not always entertainment. Sometimes they are fire alarms. Sometimes they are confessionals. Sometimes they are the only public service that cannot be defunded. And this one, for better or worse, demands that we choose whether to keep walking or finally stop and see. And if you felt shaken, good. Now hold that feeling long enough to change something beyond the theater doors. For more hard truths and deeper dives, subscribe. This is StreamSpeak.